Hello everyone, my name is Ignasius Fabianus Leban from English Literature C 2024, and today I'm going to present my poetry analysis for my final project. The poem I choose is The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. It was published in 1845 and is considered one of the most famous poems in American literature. The poem tells the story of a man who is mourning the death of his beloved Lenore. One night, a mysterious raven visits him and repeatedly states the word nevermore. I choose this poem because it explores universal themes such as grief, loneliness, memory, and the struggle to move on after losing someone we love. Before I begin the analysis, I would like to show the poem on the screen. First, I will briefly summarize the poem. The story begins with the speaker sitting alone late at night while thinking about Lenore. Poe writes, "Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary." This opening immediately creates an atmosphere of sadness and exhaustion. As the speaker reads old books and mourns his loss, a raven suddenly enters his room and sits above the door. The speaker begins asking the birds questions. However, the raven only responds with one word, nevermore. At first, the speaker is curious, but as he continues asking questions about Lenore and the possibility of seeing her again, the raven's repeated answer causes him to fall deeper into despair. By the end of the poem, the speaker feels trapped in his grief and loses all hope. Now, I will explain the genre of the poem. The Raven belongs to both narrative poetry and Gothic poetry. First, it is a narrative poem because it tells a complete story with characters, a setting, and a sequence of events. For example, the poem introduces the speakers, Lenore and the Raven. It also provides a clear setting, once upon a midnight dreary. These lines tell us when the story takes place and help establish the scene. Second, the poem is Gothic because it contains elements such as darkness, mystery, death, and supernatural events. One example is when the raven enters the room unexpectedly. In there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. The appearance of this mysterious bird creates a supernatural atmosphere, which is a common characteristic of Gothic literature. Therefore, the raven can be classified as both a narrative and Gothic poem. Next, I will explain the tone of the poem. The dominant tones are melancholic, mysterious, and despairing. The melancholic tone is established from the very beginning. While I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping. The speaker is lonely and emotionally exhausted because he is grieving Lenore. The mysterious tone appears when the raven enters the room. Neither the speaker nor the reader knows why the bird has appeared or what it represents. As the poem progresses, the tone becomes increasingly despairing. The best example is the repeated word, nevermore. Every time the raven says this word, the speaker becomes more hopeless. Towards the end of the poem, the speaker asks whether he will ever reunite with Lenore in heaven. The raven responds, nevermore. These answers destroy the speaker's last hope. As a result, the tone shifts from sadness to complete despair. For this project, I will analyze the poem using the psychological approach. This approach focuses on the emotions, thoughts, and the mental state of the characters. The speaker is clearly suffering from intense grief after the death of Lenore. Poe describes her as the rare and radiant maiden, whom the angels name Lenore. This shows how deeply the speaker loved her. From a psychological perspective, the raven may symbolize the speaker's depression or his inability to move on from the loss. Notice that the raven only says one word. However, the speaker keeps giving different meaning to that word. This suggests that the speaker's own mind is creating much of his suffering. As the poem continues, he becomes increasingly obsessed with the bird and its message. By the end, his mental state has completely deteriorated. The final line states, "And my soul, from out that shadows that lies floating on the floor, shall be lifted, nevermore." This quotation suggests that the speaker believes he will never escape his grief. Therefore, the poem can be understood as a psychological portrait of a man consumed by loss and despair. Personally, I think The Raven is a very powerful and emotional poem. What I find most interesting is how Edgar Allan Poe uses a simple word, nevermore, to create such a strong emotional effect. The poem reminds us that grief can affect the way we think and interpret the world around us. Although the poem is sad, it is realistically portrays the emotional struggles that many people experience after losing someone important. That is why the poem remains relevant even today. In conclusion, The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe is both a narrative and gothic poem that explores themes of grief, loss, memory, and despair. The poem uses a melancholic and mysterious tone, supported by quotations such as "Once upon a midnight dreary" and "Nevermore." Through the psychological approach, we can understand how the speaker grieves influence his thought and emotion throughout the poem. Overall, The Ravens remain one of the greatest poems in English literature because of its powerful symbolism, emotional depth, and timeless themes. Well, thank you all for listening to my presentation. I hope you all have a nice day and see ya.